Having a family, a wife, 3 children, as well as my acting career. Many people, they told me I was crazy to go on this journey. It's often just a question of taking a big leap. My life had never felt as perfect as standing on that hill on the last day before we steered the boat into the harbor.
It feels so strange that we're here talking about this and that this short film was made at all. Because this is in such stark contrast to our everyday experience. People like to plan everything in advance and prepare for the future. Let's say that this film you're watching doesn't exist yet.
The first time I sailed together with Pete was at sea. After that, we went to Lake Balaton. We even made a short film there. The next time we sailed was for more than 2,000 nautical miles.
It's always extraordinary when you meet someone who has the same aims and goals as you. The fact that Soma and I are both actors and that we both like sailing was the basis that we could build our friendship on.
The sea can give you so many things, but finding such a good friend, that was the greatest gift of this journey.
We had a dream that we would sail together and retrace the footsteps of Paul the Apostle. Actually, that's why we're here now. His name was Saul. He was born around the year 1 AD into a Hellenized Jewish family in the city of Tarsus. He was a tent maker by profession. He led a devout life, believing that he was following God. And he was convinced that his life as a Pharisee pleased God. He observed every religious rule. He placed a high value on the teachings of God. He regarded himself as God's servant. That's why he was persecuting Christians.
It's interesting to consider that there was no Christianity at that time. This church hadn't been born back then. Until Saul started calling himself Paul or Paulus, that is the smallest, and became a follower of Christ. He'd been amongst the most zealous persecutors of the Christians, and one of the reasons why he went to Damascus was to take the leaders of the local Christian community back to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem, where presumably they would have been executed. In 34, however, on the road to Damascus, Paul experienced his famous conversion. This life-changing event made him one of the most ardent missionaries and teachers of the Christian church. He went on 3 missionary journeys. In fact, the purpose of these journeys was to visit those places and communities where Christianity had already started to take root. These missionary journeys were several years, almost a decade apart.
Paul was tried in court in Jerusalem, and that's when his Roman origins became important, because having Roman citizenship conferred some privileges on him.
He logged an appeal with the emperor, arguing that as a Roman citizen, he cannot be convicted in Jerusalem.
The emperor at that time was Nero himself. And that's why Paul sailed from Jerusalem to Rome. This was the path we decided to follow on the first leg of our journey.
The first time we sailed together proved that we get along well, which is not surprising. And it turned out that we can cooperate on the boat. I remember that on our way back, we were already working out plans about a longer journey that we would make together.
The best thing about it was that we had an idea, but we had nothing else.
We wanted to set out from Lake Balaton, and the journey from Balaton-Fűzfő to Tihany was already kind of a pilgrimage.
It was a nice cruise because everything that we would experience during our 5-week journey was condensed into a one-day adventure. We didn't know the ship, we had to repair it so that it was fit for sailing, we had to wait for the right time before setting sail, and we knew that from then on, we couldn't make any mistakes. There were periods of calm, then a thunderstorm struck, and then we had winds coming from every direction, so we experienced everything really. For me, setting anchor at the end of that cruise was just as exhilarating as reaching the end of our journey after 5 weeks at sea.
Yeah, that moment, that sunset over Péter, how the sun went down behind the hills of Tihany.
Our maritime pilgrimage started there. And the main point of a pilgrimage is that you only concentrate on the next task. In our case, the question was, how can we take this one step further? Whether we can find companions for our journey, or whether we can make the whole thing interesting and exciting for others at all. The next big moment was when we found the boat.
We had the pre-tour meeting on a beautiful afternoon in the middle of September, and that's when we saw the whole group together for the first time. We could have, as you said, filled a bus with them.
For me, it was like discussing the details of a school trip. It was amazing. I was stunned at seeing the 40 or so people who had gathered there. That was the moment when I realized how massive this thing would be. 1 year ago, we sat here with 2 of our friends. One of them is shooting a film now, and the other has sailed to Jamaica. And now we're talking about setting off on a 5-week journey in a week from now.
I'm glad that so many people could make it today, because this is the only time this group will meet. We'll see each and every one of you on board, but it would be impossible if 40 people were on the sailboat at the same time. I can tell you what route we're planning to take, but since we'll be sailing, everything depends on the weather. I can only offer you a broad outline of what you should expect. Believe me, there are experienced sailors among us, as well as people with less experience at sea. There are also people who have never seen a sailboat in their life. But that's the beauty of it. I can tell you only one thing for sure, that everyone will be put back on shore where their plane departs from, and everyone will be picked up where their plane lands.
We can only use the opportunities that fate grants us, just like in our whole life. So we won't try to get there at all costs. However much it would mean to us to finish this journey, and however long we've been working on this, the group's comfort and safety are much more important to us. We'll see whether or not we can sail. We were planning to travel together with Soma. Just the 2 of us.
But the whole thing got much bigger.
Yeah, from one moment to the next. And being able to share this experience with the others became one of the main elements of our maritime pilgrimage.
And don't forget the diversity. We had people on board ranging in age from 4 months to 66 years.
Yeah.
There were believers and non-believers, priests and laymen. Everybody on board became a crew member and had to pull their weight.
I have been trying to cope with the difficulties I encountered here. That is primarily with seasickness caused by the constant, perpetual rocking of the boat. I have never felt anything like that on land.
The people were surprised that sometimes they had to be up all night and keep the boat on course.
Yes, they were actually our companions. And we had to share the duties on the boat and get them from point A to B.
I was sad that I had to leave after 2 weeks. But I'm happy that I could come back, and it's a pleasure to be here again.
Without our fellow travellers, we wouldn't have been able to finish this journey.
They were like the producers of this pilgrimage.
Or the main sponsors.
Yeah, that's right.
Every week was different because we were travelling between different ports and with different people. But there was one week that stood out from the rest. During that period, we had the pastors on board.
Now, when we sailed from Malta to Bari.
Yeah, from Malta to Bari, there were the 3 pastors with us on the boat.
Soma invited me to accompany them on this missionary journey and to be one of the reformed pastors of the boat. I agreed because I'm eager to help.
When I heard about it, something stirred in me because being out at sea gives me a sense of freedom.
We always teach children that they can understand God through nature, history, and conscience. And if you look around here, you'll see the wonders of nature.
I think Paul the Apostle is a cool guy. The conversion he experienced is present in all our lives.
When Paul and all the other apostles started preaching the gospel, they didn't have the Bible as we know it today. There was no Old Testament or New Testament, because this was before they wrote the bulk of it. They were rather acting out the teachings of God.
We were principally concerned with the parts that bind us together, all the various denominations, because there are many different ways of approaching our everyday life, as well as Paul himself. Our mission was to find the things that we can all agree on, regardless of the religion we practice.
Although we entered Malta on the island of Gozo, the final destination of our journey was St. Paul's Bay on the island of Malta.
According to the Acts of the Apostles, this is where Paul was shipwrecked.
We saw how shallow the water was in the bay, so it's possible that they did indeed run the ship ashore. By running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. After hoisting it up, they took measures to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run on the Syrtis, they lowered the sea anchor, and so were driven. We were being pounded by the storm so violently that on the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard, and on the third day, with their own hands, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul then stood up among them and said, "Men, You should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and thereby avoided this damage and loss. I urge you now to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For last night there stood by me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before the emperor, and indeed God has granted safety to all those who are sailing with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we will have to run aground on some island." When the 14th night had come, as we were drifting across the Sea of Adria, about midnight the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took soundings and found 20 fathoms. A little farther on they took soundings again and found 15 fathoms. Fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for a day to come. But when the sailors tried to escape from the ship and had lowered the boat into the sea, on the pretext of putting out anchors from the bow, the soldiers cut away the ropes of the boat and set it adrift. Just before daybreak, Paul urged all of them to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have been in suspense and remaining without food, having eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will help you survive. For none of you will lose a hair from your heads." After he had said this, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. After they had satisfied their hunger, they lightened the ship by throwing the wheat into the sea. In the morning, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay, with a beach on which they planned to run the ship ashore if they could. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea. At the same time, they loosened the ropes that tied the steering oars. Then, hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the ship aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the force of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, so that none might swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest to follow, some on planks and others on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. After we reached safety, we then learned that the island was called Malta. That's an important point, the island of Malta. If we interpret the scripture literally, this is not the island of Malta, that's the island of Malta. Back then, this place might have been called something else. Today, it's called St. Paul's Island. And that rat. Do you remember that rat? We set anchor off the island, got off the boat, and we saw a rat. It wasn't skinny, it was a big fat rat, and it was
trying to get chummy. Stepping ashore always feels strange, because in your mind, you're still on the ship. The hustle and bustle of the port always makes me dizzy. It was truly extraordinary. Despite the fact that we'd already reached Malta and disembarked, our Paul the Apostle's story hadn't come to an end there. You know, he was practically walking down the street towards us. A car drove past us with a number plate.
Paul 002.
And we also saw a statue of St. Paul in a shop window.
We were looking for the church, and there was a sign that read, St. Paul's Shipwreck Church.
You are very lucky to come to this church, believe me. This is part of the pillar, original, which was executed. In here, only in Malta, you will see these two pieces and the statue of St. Paul. We get it from Rome, 1789, I believe. Here we have a red seal as well to show that it's authentic, that is from the Vatican.
That's the church where the annual procession honoring St. Paul starts. All the leaders of Malta gather for that occasion.
You can see the statue of St. Paul. It is a piece of wood sculpture. It was made by a Maltese born. His name was Melchiorre Gaffin. We take it out on the 10th of February, procession in the street. To carry it, you need 8 people, 4 in front and 4 at the back, carried on shoulder.
There was a huge sign. Using cameras was forbidden, and we didn't have a filming permit. So I asked Joseph whether it was okay, and he said, of course, of course.
You can see part of the wrist of the right hand of St. Paul, the bone, I mean. Those are 3 red seals, those are from the Vatican to make sure it's authentic. When I see people are interested, you know, I can tell because sometimes tourists come in and spending just 1 minute and they go. You did a good choice to come to Valletta, you know. Good.
For me, the most important result of this journey was that we met all those people. That our dream, what the two of us had planned, meant a lot to our friends as well. They were also transformed by this adventure, and they also contributed to it in their own ways. It was a test to see whether something like this can be done.
Yeah, it was great that everybody was happy to chip in with something they know best. Hi there. Video blog episode, whatever. I have no idea what day is today. Time for me has totally lost its meaning. We're standing close to the peak of Mount Etna. One thing is for sure, Paul did not come up here. Istvan is preparing smoked ribs with dumplings in bean goulash. Right, Istvan?
Yes.
And what are you doing now?
I'm dumping the dumplings into the goulash.
Fantastic. Yesterday saw a great feat. We hoisted Vicky to the top of the mast. She was the hero of the day. What are you writing, Peter?
I'm taking note of our bearings and the sea state.
We met a couple of fishermen and bought some special fish from them. Ladies and gentlemen, the highlight of today's video blog entry is our 2 pastors cleaning the fish for our farewell dinner. Hey Lottie, you with the white sunglasses, please tell us what kind of fish this is and exactly what are you doing?
First, we are trying to clean the fish.
Man, I've cleaned many fish in my life, but none with such spiky, bulletproof vest of skin.
It has huge teeth.
I don't know whether there is poison in these spikes.
We will throw this back to the sea.
So we only throw fish and various parts of the fish back into the sea.
But everything we keep will be really delicious.
Bye guys, thank you.
Of course, we're thinking about continuing our journey in the footsteps of Paul the Apostle. We haven't ticked it off our bucket list yet. The mission hasn't ended.
Will you shut down the left engine? I'll shut down the right one, all right? Wait, no. I'll shut down the left one because I usually stood here.
Okay.
Come on.
Put it into neutral. And now?
Pete and I realized that about 1.5, 2 months after we got home, well, that is towards the end of December or early January, we started to, we started to miss the ropes. It's astonishing how long it takes to process everything that happened at sea.
We're planning to continue this maritime pilgrimage next summer with the next leg of our journey. We'll be cruising on the Aegean Sea, calling at the ports of Athens, Corinth, Ephesus, Patmos and Rhodes. I hope that many people will join us and that lots of ships will sail in the footsteps of Paul the Apostle.
I hope not to fear my calling and that challenging cruise. And I hope that, God willing, at some point in the future, we can make this maritime pilgrimage between Jerusalem and Rome. It would be truly amazing if others would hear this calling too. Let's work on this, all right?